Hi everyone, welcome to Frankenstein's Fabrics Mystery Block 12. This is October's block, the one that I am behind with, and this month's one is what I'm calling Square in a Square with a Twist. Now, you may have seen this block in other places with different names. Sometimes it's a zigzag block, things like that, because of the way the shape moves around the block, but I'm calling it Square in a Square with a Twist because it's the same process of creating a center square and then creating surrounds. So that's something that I wanted to showcase. The other thing with this block is you could also call it a donut because it does look very much like a donut. And if you think back to our snowball block, you could make square in a square by adjusting the sizes of your outside corners. So if you wanted to go back to that more traditional looking square in a square, you can, but this donut slash square in a square with a twist is the one we're doing today. So what I wanted you to do is have 3 fabrics for this one. The reason being is because we need fabric to move in a certain way. So I'm going to explain all of this face on, and then I'll go straight into the assembly. So once again, I've pre-cut everything. Everything will be in the instructions for you. I have rounded up because we are dealing with 7/8 of an inch, and if we're that far off, we may as well go up to the whole number. So what I want you to do is 2 squares, a 5-inch square of the fabric that's going to go in the center and the outside corners. But the center square is to be 4.5 inches. So 2 at 5, 1 at 4 of this fabric. So if this is a directional print, it means the square in the center will be the right way up, and the ones on the corners will move around a bit, but we're not too concerned about that. So that's that one. So 2 5s, 1 4.5. Of your other 2 fabrics, you will need 3 squares that are 5-inch. Now, if you're going to cut these at the exact measurement, these will be 4 7/8. But because we're rounding up, I'm not going to bother because we're going to trim everything back. So that's 3 squares, 5-inch square of your 2 other fabrics. So I've chosen my lightest pink and my black because I want some high contrast here, but I also wanted it to coordinate with my other fabric. Now, if you remember back to our heart block, we did prep some half square triangles off the offcuts from our heart block. Now, if you would like to use these up at this point now, you can do so. So we'd be trimming them back to the size we need because these are quite large. I think they were 6 inches square. You would need to then still cut 2 squares of your 2 other fabrics to make enough squares, because you will only have this from your 1 heart block. So if you wanted to use those up, by all means you can. So instead of cutting 3 5-inch squares, you would cut 2 5-inch squares of each color. Okay, so I am going to swing the camera around and I'm going to set everything up on the cutting table for you so you can see. As always, if you've got any questions, please let me know. I also did want to pop in, I did pop into the sewing group on Facebook, that my favorite brand of starch, spray starch, that's an aerosol, not because I like the other one too, is back at the supermarket. I found this the other day. They've changed the can, so it's nice and elongated now. Normally the can was like the squat can. I think this was $5.50 from memory, thereabouts. If you do decide to use this one, be advised that it will leave debris on your fabrics, and that's just, it'll wash out, so that won't be a problem. The thing with crisp is, if you are using it on in a room where you don't have carpet, you've got tiles or lino or slate or anything like that, put something down on the ground before you start spraying, because the residue as you're spraying will land on the ground and it makes the ground slippery, and you don't notice it until it's too late. Ask me how I know. So just a little safety OH&S there. Now I'm also filming today November's block, and then I will leave December's one for a little while. And then in the new year we're going to be talking about assembling our blocks together, our sashings and our borders. Now if you've got questions, once you've got all your blocks together, if you've got questions about your sashing and your borders, please talk to me before you go and buy anything, or if you've got something in your stash you want to check if it works, just let me know. Send me a text message or a photo or an email, and we can have a quick chat. Now I'm actually going to be using a black and white stripe for mine, so I'm going to be talking about like directional things and mitered corners and all sorts of stuff like that. So if you want to go in that same direction, just have a quick word to me if you get stuck with anything. No question is too silly. Please ask the question, because it helps everybody. So we'll go from there. So I'm going to swing the camera around, we'll get started, and it's nice and rainy today, so it's a perfect day for this. So I will get started and we will assemble this block. Okay, so here we have our fabrics. Now this is our 4.5 inch square, so you won't have to do anything with this for a little while, so you can pop that to the side. So what I would like you to do is match up your squares to each other. So this is where we have to keep an eye on things. So what you want to do is you want to have one black square with one of your prints, one pink with one of your prints, and then match a black and a pink and a black and a pink. Now, because this is black, unless you've got white marking pencils, by all means turn this over to the other side. Now you've done this before with the half square triangles, so we're going to do it again. So you draw on the diagonal. Now I'm just using a lead pencil because this is going to be a line that's cut on, so it doesn't matter. Now if you're looking at your directional print, if you decide that you want to have all of the directions going in the same direction of this print, you will need to make more squares than what I'm showing you here. And the reason being is because you want to be able to rotate them in a certain way so that you get the directional print. So if you look where that diagonal is going this way here, if I was to flip that over, you will see that my cats are upright. If I flip this one over, they're upright, but because of the rotation of this section, it may end up upside down. So over to the machine, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch either side of each of these lines. Okay, so I've got my machine threaded up with my Aurifil. I have my Universal 8012 needle on. I have my 1/4 inch foot on. So I've got white thread in so you can see, I hope you can see it on screen. So you line up the guide of your 1/4 inch, or if you've got a different type of 1/4 inch foot, it will be the edge. If you find that your 1/4 inch isn't scant enough, you can move it across. I find occasionally, mine's normally set to a 3.5, but I can move it across a bit to about 4.5. It just gives me slightly more scant edge if I'm using like a thicker thread, or if something is just creating that little bit of bulk. So all we're going to do is sew down with the guide on the pencil line, and we're going to sew down either side. Now this is a great way to do your chain piecing, as it saves thread and it saves a bit of time. chain piecing is very efficient, so if you're not in the habit of it, give it a go, because then you'll find that there's less starting and stopping, and that you'll be a lot faster at your piecing than if you start and stop and cut threads and things like that. Okay, so at this point I will cut the tails from the start. My scissors, I think it might be time for them to be sharpened. Okay, separate. Now if you've got different methods of separating your blocks, by all means, some people use those little gadgets that are a blade. So now all we do is turn everything around. So we've done one side and we're turning it around to do the other. Okay, so once again, separate your blocks, your units, whatever you want to call them, and then we are going to cut on the pencil line. And then we're going to press the seams open, depending on which fabric it is, and we'll check where the bulk is going to fall. And we'll do some trimming and then assembly. Now you can cut this with a rotary cutter if you feel like, but I just eyeball it with my hand, with the scissors, because it's so much easier. Okay, over to the ironing board. Okay, so here we are at the ironing board. Now we do have fabrics where we've got a dark side and a light side. So if you want to press your seams to the dark side, you can do that, or you can press your seams open. Now if you press them open, just remember to check that you don't have any shadowing happening on the front that might cause like a visual disruption, but totally up to you. Now I think I might press these all open because I'm going to have to do seams. There's a lot of junctions in this because it's essentially like a 9 patch, so we're going to have a lot of junctions meeting, so we're going to have a lot of bulk at those intersections. Now if your blocks need a bit more starch at this point, by all means, make sure that you check that there's no roll in the seam and don't overstretch and overpress. If you stretch and overpress, you will have a buckled seam. It will curve, but the starch does help a lot in this instance. So continue pressing these open until they're all done, and then head back to your cutting board. And if you've got a small ruler, a square inch ruler, say a 6.5 square or a 4.5 inch square, that'll be the most useful to you at this point, because we're going to be doing some small cutting to trim these to the right size. Also, if you have a rotating cutting mat, they're very handy. They're usually about a 12-inch diameter cutting mat. They're quite handy if you've got to do a lot of cutting and rotating of a shape. So for instance, this is a good instance for that type of mat, because what you'll be doing is you've got to cut two sides and then turn and cut again, but you don't want to disrupt what you've already cut. So if you leave it on the rotating mat and turn it, you're then turning the block in the right position for you to make the next cut. So I'll get mine out so we can do that in the next step. If anybody would like to purchase a rotating cutting mat, please let me know. I will do them as a special order. I don't keep them in stock because I just don't have the room. Okay, so over to the cutting mat. Okay, so here we have our rotating cutting mat, and I also have my two small rulers here, and the reason why I want to talk about these is because when you are cutting small pieces, you don't want to be using an unwieldy ruler or any gadget that's a bit unwieldy. You want to keep something that's consistent with the size that you're working with. It minimizes any slipping or any damage or anything like that. So what we actually want to do today is we now want everything to be 4.5 inches. So we're trimming these back to this size so that it all matches up, because this is the center of our block. So if you've got this size ruler, that's fine. If you've got the smaller one, it's better, but totally up to you. So what I'm going to show you first is on these rulers, there will be a 45-degree line, and you want that line to match up with your seam. And then you want to trim off your excess and make sure that everything is 4.5. Now you can see here that I'm only a fraction out. The block I cut it bigger. I rounded up from the 4 7/8 to 5 inches. So if I had cut it at 4 7/8, these probably would have been bang on the right measurement. I wouldn't have to trim them, although I could take off these little triangles if I wanted to. The thing with cutting half square triangles, I find that if you are either unsure of your accuracy or you feel that some step in the process leads to an inaccuracy, like ironing for instance, if you cut your squares a little bit bigger, it just gives you that tiny amount of wiggle room for you to trim everything back. It allows if there's any stretch or fraying or anything that can go wrong in the process. So if you have your 6.5 inch ruler, you can pop it on there and you can check that 45-degree angle and you can cut. Now this is where the beauty of the rotating mat comes in. So as you can see, it moves. So this is, you need to be careful, but you do 2 cuts, remove the scrap, remove the ruler and rotate your work. Now these sides here are the ones I just cut. I line them up with the 4.5 inch line, cross-referencing it with the 45-degree angle along the seam line, and I cut again. And there I have a perfect 4.5 inch square. Now if you don't have the 6.5 but you do have a 4.5, it is exactly the same process, except you are working with a smaller ruler, so you need to keep your fingers a bit tighter as you use your rotary cutter, because we don't want any injuries. So trim everything back to the 4.5 inch, and then we will come back and do our layout. Just wanted to show you one more thing with the 4.5 inch and the rotating cutting mat. This is where having the correct size rulers and templates and things makes a lot more sense. So here I have my 4.5 inch triangle, half square triangle unit, and I am popping my 45-degree angle on, and I am keeping my edges of the ruler inside the lines of, you can see it's just a fraction out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4. I've not moved my square, I've not moved my ruler, and everything is now accurate. And that is just the beauty of a rotating mat. So if you plan on doing a project where you're going to have to trim back a lot of units, get your right size template, get your rotary cutter, and if you don't like using the big one, get a 28mm one. It's about half the size of this one. It's a lot more comfortable to use if you're doing lots of little cutting like this, and the rotating mat, and you can get through a lot of this trimming very quickly, more efficiently, and safely. So, back to your cutting. Okay, so now we're at our layout stage. So what we want to do here is we want to have our center, which is this one here, is our focal point, is the whole of our donut. We then want our 4 outer fabrics that match it in the corners. Now, this is where we have to work out where our rotation is. And so this is where you will start to play with our, I guess you'd call it the spiral, I guess, if you want to call it that way. So what we have here is we're starting to create a path where the pink is going this way. So we then want to have a pink and a black, which I think, there we go, goes that way. We then have our cats and our black going this way, and then our next pink and our black, which will go, hang on, this way. This is one of those blocks you've got to sit with for a moment because your brain will just kind of take it in a bit. Now this one will go here and this one will go here. And you can see we've got our rotation right, which is awesome. So if you're using one of these, you won't have to play around with those blocks. Okay, so now you can see, let me just rejig that camera a fraction. There we go. You can see we've got our square in a square with a twist. So it's our donut. So what you want to do now is the same as we've done for previous blocks, is join your rows together. So your 3 units across each row, join them together in pairs, and then the third one on the end. We will press the seams and then we will join the 3 rows together. So we'll head back to the sewing machine and we will get sorted. Okay, so like previously, I've got my units all lined up on my extension table here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the first 2, so the center one and the very left top block. I am going to put them together and sew down this side. Now I'm just going to do this slowly because I want to keep those seams in the right way. Now, if you want to come back to that first row and sew the 3rd piece on, you can. If not, what I like to do is keep the 3rd block over to my right here, and that way I can continue doing this without interfering with my workspace. Remember the chain piece. Now the starch has worked really well on this pink fabric, but the black still feels a little soft. Now that could just mean that I didn't use enough starch on the black, or it could just mean that there's a slightly different absorption rate for each fabric, and it doesn't take as well. Okay, so there is my first paired units. Now I'm going to take the top one and join it. And the reason why I only cut the first one off is because I want to continue chain piecing. So and by only doing one at a time, it keeps everything in sequence. And because it's attached to other pieces, it's in order, and I can't stuff that order up. Now remember, if you do want a pin, totally up to you. Okay, so I now have my 3 rows pieced. I'm just going to go over to the iron and press the seams open, and then I will be back at the machine. Okay, so over to the ironing board. I've separated my 3 rows from each other with the chain piecing. Now, normally I would say to you to iron into the center and out from the center, but because we've pressed these seams open, I'm going to continue that theme here and just distribute the bulk nice and evenly. So watch your fingers with the heat, and just press. If you do need more starch, keep that on hand, because it does help. Now, as you can see, I'm not pushing my iron, just pressing. So we have our nice flat block here. Now, you can see this bit here where it does not match up. That is your seam allowance. So when we attach the next row, that's the point that you'll be hitting that will disappear that seam allowance. Okay, so next row. Again, check for any shadowing. If you need to grade the seams, we've spoken about that previously as well, and it's just a case of just taking it a little bit back so it doesn't cause that shadow on the front. Now, if you need to check the front seam and check that there's no rolls, check those and repress if you need to. But I think the starch has done a very good job. I'm so glad I found crisp again. It's done a very good job today on those seams, keeping everything beautifully flat. Okay, so now just check everything, make sure everything's lining up properly, double press anything if you have to. Now, at this stage, I will pin this because I want these seams to be perfectly nestled into each other. So, pins. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to flip my top row, and I'm going, because I'm not abutting the seams in the same way that we have done before when we press one to one angle and one to the right. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm looking for where the seam is on both sides, and I'm lining that up. I'm going to put a pin in it that way. I'm also going to pop a pin in either end of the row just to hold it so it doesn't flap in any direction. And then I'm going to, now this one's black on black on black, so I'm just going to hold it into the better light. Okay. And then once again, just another pin up the top here to hold that row. So then I'll sew that, and then I'll pin the bottom row into the next spot and then sew that. Okay, so back at the machine, got my 1/4 inch in place. I'm just going to take the first pin out, and I'm just going to stitch slowly because I want to be able to make sure all my seams stay in the right spot. And if you feel them flip under or over or anything like that, just use a pin or a tailor's awl just to flick them back. You really just want to keep your fingers away from any damage that might happen. Okay, so we've got our seam, and we can double check. And yes, our black is perfectly there, and our black and pink meet perfectly there. So we take our bottom row and we do the same again. So we're going to line up those seams. We got black on black again. If you do have to work with a lot of black fabric, you will find it better sewing in daylight hours, or get yourself a really good lamp. Okay, got everything in position, needle down and remove the first pin and start slowly again. Remember not to sew over your pins unless you're wearing safety goggles. So, back to the ironing board for a final press, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I just wanted to show you what I meant before about hitting a specific spot on your seam allowance. So if you just have a look here, this is that little piece I was talking about, and I've just hit it with the tip of the needle and the stitches. That is the 1/4 inch. So then when you flip over to the front, you can see how perfectly that has positioned itself into there. So we are now having our final press. So we may as well keep up the same routine that we've done. Just turn it this way and press. Now I did flip a little bit of a seam there, so if I wanted to, I can go back and fix that. What you can do, I'll show you. I will show you that technique because it's very helpful. If you ever find that your abutting hasn't gone into the right spot, so let's just say this black was too far over, this piece of black here was too far over into this pink, you could go in and where that's abutting needs to happen, you could remove, let's call it 20 stitches, depending on where your machine goes. And you could move them. So you just want to take out the straight seam that you've done. Okay, so I've just unpicked, let's call it 1 inch, right? And I want to reposition that where that seam is, flip it over and check where they're going to butt up to each other. Remove any fluff that's in the way. And that way what you could do then is you could go back in, repin it, go back in and re-stitch it. And any easing that you have to do on either side here will absorb the movement and you will get your butting back in the right spot. So I'll just fix that and I'll come back. Okay, so I've just fixed up where that seam had flipped. So now I can go in and press open my seams. So if you struggle with pressing your seams for whatever reason, you can go in and finger press. The starch will actually help with a bit of control here. So a bit of a finger press, you can see it's not quite right, but finger pressing allows you to then come in with the iron and keeping your hands away from it. So remember not to push, just press. And if you have trouble with the black on black, finger press as best you can and then come in. And try not to work too far away from yourself. Don't stretch over and reach over, creating problems. That's how I ended up burning myself that time. I can still see the scar. I reached across the iron and I shouldn't have because I wasn't paying attention. So please be careful because some of the gadgets we do use in quilting are dangerous. Okay, so now we are all nice and pressed. Now it does look a little crinkly and that's just the pressing and the steam, but you can give it one more press from the front and that will go away, and it will also disappear when we're quilting and things like that too, so don't worry too much. So we're all good to go. We have our square and a square with a twist, or our donut block. If you've got any questions or need help with picking fabrics or wanting to talk about the technique, whatever it is, please let me know. I will get on to November's block and then we will see how we go for the rest of the year. Please hit that subscribe button, click the little bell for notifications. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.